Ladies and gentlemen, clarity is kindness. That's something we don't talk about enough when it comes to boundaries. We often associate boundaries with conflict, rejection, or confrontation. But boundaries aren't about pushing people away, they're about holding ourselves close. For someone who has spent a lifetime absorbing the emotions of others, managing chaos, and softening their voice to keep the peace, clarity in boundaries can feel like betrayal. But the truth is, it's the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself and everyone around you. When you're wired to feel deeply, you often fall into the role of the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who just wants everyone to be okay. It sounds noble, it feels selfless, but what it really is over time is a slow erosion of your identity. You start shrinking your needs to accommodate others. You explain away disrespect because they didn't mean it. You rationalize emotional labor as love, and somewhere along the way, you lose track of what your yes and your no actually mean. Clarity in boundaries starts with the courage to tell the truth about what hurts, the truth about what depletes you, the truth about what you're no longer willing to carry. And that kind of honesty isn't loud. It's not performative. It doesn't need a dramatic announcement. It's usually quiet, steady. It shows up in decisions like, I won't answer that call tonight, or I'm no longer engaging in conversations that leave me feeling small. It's not about proving a point. It's about protecting your peace. What makes boundaries feel so hard, especially for deeply empathetic people, is the fear of being misunderstood. What if they think I don't care? What if I hurt their feelings? But here's the thing. Caring about others does not require you to abandon yourself. In fact, when you start setting boundaries from a place of self-awareness, you begin modeling a new kind of empathy, one that includes you. You begin showing others that love isn't measured by how much you give until you break, but by how well you care for your own emotional ecosystem. It's easy to confuse overfunctioning with strength, but true strength is knowing where you end and someone else begins. It's resisting the urge to over-explain yourself when you say no. It's no longer internalizing someone else's reaction to your boundary as your responsibility. Because how people respond to your clarity says more about them than it does about you. And sometimes the only way to truly see someone's character is to stop bending your boundaries for them. Clarity also reveals relationships for what they are. Not what you hoped they'd be, not what they used to be, but what they are today. When you start showing up as your full self, when you speak with honesty and set limits, you might lose people. That's true. But you don't lose the people who were meant to walk with you in wholeness. You lose the people who benefited from your confusion, and that's not loss. That's liberation. When you get clear on your boundaries, your energy shifts. You no longer over-explain, overextend, or overfunction. You stop trying to manage other people's emotions. You stop making excuses for mistreatment. You stop accepting crumbs and calling it connection. In that kind of clarity, it's not aggressive, it's not hard or cold, it's firm but kind, it's grounded, not guarded. It says, I know my worth. I know what I bring to the table, and I no longer accept being drained in the name of being nice. Boundaries are not ultimatums, they're declarations of self-respect. They say, I love myself enough to choose peace over performance. They are a practice, not a one-time event. Some days they come naturally. Other days they feel uncomfortable, even trodden, but over time they become a part of your language, your rhythm, and as they do, you begin attracting relationships that feel safe, mutual, and sustaining. So if you're someone who's tired, who's given too much for too long, who feels unseen or unheard, start small, start with clarity, start with one honest no. Start by listening to that voice inside that says, this isn't working for me anymore. Start by honoring your own capacity. Because clarity in boundaries isn't the end of connection. It's the beginning of authentic, wholehearted living, and you deserve nothing less. For most of us who are wired for empathy, people, pleasing doesn't start as a conscious choice. It begins as survival. It starts with the belief that being kind, helpful, agreeable, or easygoing will keep us safe. Safe from abandonment, safe from conflict, safe from rejection. Somewhere along the way, we learn that if we can anticipate everyone's needs, say the right thing, stay agreeable, and keep the peace, then maybe, just maybe, we'll feel loved, we'll feel wanted, we'll feel enough. But the cost of that survival strategy, it's steep, people. Pleasing is not kindness, it's self-abandonment dressed up as virtue. It's performing emotional labor in relationships that are often one-sided. It's saying yes when your body is screaming no. It's twisting yourself into versions of who people need you to be, not because you don't have your own identity, but because you've been conditioned to believe that your identity must adjust for others to stay. And for a while it works. You get praised for being helpful. You get labeled so easy to get along with. You're the one people go to when they need something fixed, something softened, something carried. But inside you're exhausted. Inside you start to feel invisible, because the more you please, the more you disappear. The more you say yes to everyone else, the more your own needs get silenced, not just by them, but by you. Eventually, something shifts, and it's usually not dramatic. It's quiet. It happens on a random Tuesday when you realize you've said yes to something again out of obligation, and you feel that familiar tightness in your chest. Or maybe it's when you hear yourself saying it's okay, really, after being hurt, and something inside you whispers, actually, it's not. It's in those small moments that a crack forms in the armor of people, pleasing. And through that crack, truth starts to seep in. The truth is, you don't owe anyone a version of you that is slowly killing your spirit. You start to realize that self-respect is not selfish. It's necessary. It's not about swinging the pendulum to the other extreme, becoming cold or rigid. It's about stepping into a more honest, grounded, authentic way of being, a way that includes you, a way that prioritizes your peace just as much as it values connection. Because real connection, soul, nourishing, meaningful connection, cannot exist if one person is constantly shrinking to make space for the other. Shifting from people, pleasing to self-respect is not an overnight transformation. It's a process, and in the beginning, it feels deeply uncomfortable. You'll say no and feel guilty. You'll assert a boundary and second. Guess yourself. You'll worry that people will get angry, disappointed, or leave. And some might. That's the part no one really tells you about. Some people are deeply invested in the version of you that caters to their comfort. When that version no longer exists, they may push back, accuse you of changing, or try to manipulate you back into old roles. But that discomfort, it's growth. It's what it feels like to honor yourself in ways you never have before. It's what it feels like to be responsible for your own well-being instead of outsourcing your worth to others' approval. And with each choice to honor your truth, your capacity for self-respect expands. You begin to speak more honestly, not to be hurtful, but to be real. You start to check in with yourself before automatically saying yes. You begin to understand that your value is not dependent on being needed. And perhaps most powerfully, you realize that not everyone deserves access to the most tender parts of you. Your empathy is sacred. Your energy is finite, and your job is not to be everything to everyone. It's to be true to you. This shift also redefines how you love. You stop over-functioning in relationships. You stop fixing, rescuing, or absorbing. You start holding space instead of holding burdens, and as your self-respect grows, so does your ability to discern who truly reciprocates your energy. You begin to attract people who value you not for what you do for them, but for who you are, unapologetically. And here's the beauty of it. The more you stand in your self-respect, the more your relationships improve. Not all of them. Some will fall away. But the ones that remain and the new ones that emerge are built on mutual respect, trust, and authenticity. You no longer have to perform to be loved. You no longer have to prove your worth. You get to be fully human, messy, flawed, radiant, and still worthy of love and belonging, in the end shifting from people, pleasing to self-respect is not about becoming less kind. It's about becoming more whole. It's about realizing that your voice matters, your needs matter, your feelings matter, and you never had to earn love by disappearing. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to disappoint others in order to honor yourself. You are allowed to say, I matter too. And when you start living from that place of radical self-respect, you don't just heal, you inspire others to do the same. Silence is so often misunderstood. In a world that rewards quick comebacks, loud opinions, and instant reactions, choosing silence can look like defeat. It can be mistaken for weakness, passivity, or fear. But the truth is, silence, intentional, grounded silence, is one of the most powerful acts of self-respect there is. It's not the silence of submission. It's the silence of sovereignty. There comes a moment in every person's life, especially those who feel deeply, when they realize that not everything deserves their reaction. Not every provocation requires a response. Not every insult needs to be met with a defense. And not every moment of chaos needs their energy. This realization doesn't come from burnout alone. It comes from wisdom earned the hard way, through heartbreak, through manipulation, through years of explaining yourself to people who were never really listening. When you're empathetic by nature, you're often quick to speak, to soothe, to clarify. You want to fix the misunderstanding. You want to make sure no one's upset. You want to be understood. And while there's nothing wrong with wanting harmony, the compulsion to always explain, to always answer, to always defend your intention, it starts to chip away at your inner peace. You begin to feel like your energy is on trial in every room you walk into. And eventually you realize this isn't about clarity anymore. This is about control, and that's when silence becomes your sanctuary. Silence says, I no longer need to convince you. It says, my worth isn't up for debate. It says, I trust myself enough to not get pulled into this. Choosing silence is not giving up. It's knowing when a conversation has stopped being about connection and started being about power. And that's a line you learn to stop crossing. There's also a deep kind of strength in not revealing everything, in not letting others into every emotional space you occupy. When you choose to withhold your response, not out of fear, but out of discernment, you're reclaiming your emotional bandwidth. You're saying, I decide what's worthy of my voice. And that kind of inner authority, that's not weakness, that's mastery. The world doesn't teach us to value silence. It teaches us to react. It teaches us to speak quickly, post quickly, clap back quickly. But reactivity is not the same as power. Reactivity is often just a nervous system in distress, trying to protect itself. Wisdom, on the other hand, is knowing how to pause. It's learning that your peace is more important than proving your point. It's recognizing that some people argue to win, not to understand, and engaging with that is like trying to plant seeds in concrete. Nothing grows there. There's a quiet revolution in refusing to be baited, in not answering the phone call that you know will drain you, in not responding to the text that's designed to provoke, in walking away from the conversation that will leave you spiraling for days. These aren't acts of avoidance. These are acts of radical self-protection, of trusting your gut, of not feeding the dysfunction. Silence, in these moments, is how you hold onto your sanity, and it's not just in conflict. Silence is sacred in healing, too. Sometimes the deepest growth happens in the spaces where nothing is said. When you finally stop trying to make someone see your heart, and instead you see your own. When you sit in stillness and hear what your intuition has been trying to whisper to you all along. When you stop filling the void with noise and you let it be a space of reflection, of rest, of remembering who you are. Silence is where you hear the truth that you are allowed to outgrow roles, stories, and relationships that no longer serve your becoming. That you are not required to stay in emotional conversations that only serve to exhaust and confuse you. That you have nothing to prove to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, and that your peace is not up for negotiation. To be silent is not to be voiceless, it's to be choosy with your voice. It's knowing that sometimes your presence, your boundaries, your withdrawal say more than words ever could. It's refusing to dilute your truth just to keep a false sense of connection alive. It's understanding that walking away without fanfare doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise, and here's the most powerful part. Silence makes space for the right things to come through, for real clarity. For healing, for aligned action, when you're not constantly reacting, you start responding. With intention, with groundedness, with self-respect. Silence slows the world down enough for you to hear yourself. And in a culture that wants you loud and distracted, that's an act of rebellion. So if you've been told that you're too quiet, too distant, too detached, check the source. Is your silence coming from fear? Or is it coming from wisdom? Because there's a difference between shrinking and choosing, between being silenced and choosing stillness. And when your silence is rooted in self, rust, in discernment, in peace, it's not empty. It's full of power, full of presence, full of truth that doesn't need an audience. Silence isn't weakness. It's the language of the emotionally free. Emotional labor is often invisible, but its weight is very real. It's the mental and emotional energy spent soothing others, managing their moods, absorbing their projections, and making sure everything feels okay, even when it's not. It's the unpaid, unspoken, and often unacknowledged work of carrying the emotional temperature of a relationship, a home, or a workplace. And for those who are naturally empathetic, sensitive, or peace-seeking, emotional labor becomes a way of life. It starts early. Maybe you were the child who kept the peace in the family, the one who could sense tension before words were even spoken, the one who learned to read between the lines, to anticipate needs, to make yourself small so others could feel big. And maybe you were praised for it, called mature, thoughtful, responsible, but no one tells a child that being emotionally attuned can easily turn into being emotionally overburdened. No one says you don't have to carry what isn't yours. So you grow up and it follows you. You become the one who checks in even when you're struggling, the one who smooths over arguments, the one who listens, comforts, explains, softens, accommodates. You become the safe space for everyone else. But what happens when you're the one who needs holding? What happens when no one asks how you're doing because you've always been the strong one, the stable one, the helper? There's a profound loneliness in being the emotional anchor. Because while you're holding everyone else, no one's holding you. And it's not that people are inherently unkind. Sometimes they simply don't see the weight you're carrying because you've never let it show. You've performed strength so well that they assume you're fine, but inside you're tired, not just physically tired, but soul tired. The kind of tired that comes from constantly prioritizing others' emotional well-being over your own. That's where the truth becomes unavoidable. Emotional labor has limits. You are not a bottomless well of patience. You are not a never-ending source of calm. You are not responsible for how others choose to respond to their lives. Your compassion is beautiful, but it cannot sustain relationships that are built on imbalance. And your empathy, while powerful, should never become your burden to bear alone. Setting limits on emotional labor doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying. It means you begin asking, is this mine to hold? It means recognizing that love is not measured by how much pain you absorb. It means giving yourself permission to step back from conversations that drain you, dynamics that confuse you, and roles that reduce you. And yes, when you begin setting these limits, you'll likely feel guilt. The first few times you say, I can't be your emotional dumping ground right now, or I need space to process my own feelings. It might feel like betrayal. especially if you've built your identity around being the emotionally available one. But here's what you'll learn. Every time you choose your own peace over someone else's comfort, you're not being selfish, you're being healthy. What's more, the people who truly value you will adjust. They might be surprised at first, they might resist, but the ones who love you for who you are, not just for what you provide, will rise to meet you in this new space of mutuality. The ones who don't, they were never invested in a real relationship. They were invested in your emotional labor, and that's a hard but necessary truth. There's also a grieving process in stepping back from this kind of emotional overfunctioning. You may have to grieve the fantasy that you could fix it all, keep everyone happy, or hold relationships together by sheer emotional effort. You may have to let go of the role of rescuer or therapist in dynamics that never gave you the same in return. And grief, in this case, is not a sign you're doing the wrong thing. It's a sign you're healing. When you stop overextending emotionally, something beautiful begins to happen. You start to notice how much more energy you have. You start to feel your own emotions more clearly, unfiltered by everyone else's. You begin to take up space in your own life, not just as a support system for others, but as a fully alive, feeling, deserving human being. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you start to feel free. Because at the heart of it, this isn't just about boundaries. It's about identity. It's about rewriting the story that says your worth is tied to your ability to make others feel better. It's about understanding that you are allowed to be cared for too, that your feelings are just as valid, that your needs matter just as much. You were never meant to be the emotional sponge for the world. You were meant to feel, to love, to connect, but not to carry the unprocessed pain of everyone around you. So let this be your permission slip, to pause, to step back, to breathe, to say, I am done overgiving. And in that space where emotional labor ends, self-love begins. Vulnerability is powerful, sacred, and deeply human. It's the act of showing up without a mask, of speaking your truth when your voice shakes, of letting people see the parts of you that don't have it all figured out. It's not weakness, it's courage in its rawest form. But in a culture obsessed with exposure, where sharing is constant, boundaries are blurred, and authenticity is often mistaken for oversharing, there's a truth we need to remember. Vulnerability doesn't mean access. Just because you choose to be open doesn't mean everyone gets a front row seat to your inner world. You can be real without being available to everyone. You can be emotionally honest without putting your heart in the hands of people who haven't earned your trust. Vulnerability is not about proving something to others. It's about honoring your own truth, and part of that honor is discerning who deserves to witness it. So often, especially for those who feel deeply and lead with empathy, vulnerability becomes a default mode. You've likely grown up learning that if you're transparent, kind, and emotionally available, people will meet you in that same place, but not everyone will. Not everyone has the capacity. Not everyone has the intention. And not everyone is safe. Being vulnerable with the wrong people can feel like betrayal. Only it's not them betraying you. It's you betraying yourself by handing over something sacred to someone who wasn't equipped to hold it. And that can leave wounds, wounds that say, I shouldn't have said anything, wounds that say it's not safe to be seen. But the truth is, it is safe to be seen, to be real, to be soft, but only with the right people. There's a big difference between being vulnerable and being emotionally exposed. The former is intentional, the latter is often desperate. One comes from strength, the other from a longing to be validated. When we confuse vulnerability with a need to be understood by everyone, we begin bleeding in front of people who don't even have the emotional tools to care. We start giving access to parts of ourselves that should be protected, not as a wall, but as an act of self-respect. There's this quiet pressure, especially in relationships, to open up quickly, to share everything, to prove intimacy by revealing your wounds, but intimacy isn't built through rapid-fire confessionals. It's built through consistency, safety, and reciprocal care. Real connection is not measured by how fast someone knows your pain, it's measured by how gently they hold it once they do, and if they can't hold it. That's not your failure, that's your feedback. Boundaries are not barriers to vulnerability. They are what make vulnerability possible in the first place. Without boundaries, vulnerability becomes chaos. It becomes a free-for, all of emotional exposure with no container, but with boundaries, vulnerability becomes art. It becomes intentional. It becomes a choice rather than a compulsion, and that choice is yours to make. You are allowed to pause before you share. You are allowed to ask yourself, has this person earned my story? You are allowed to keep certain things sacred, not out of shame, but out of self-protection. Not everyone is entitled to your inner world just because they ask for it. Not everyone who listens deserves to hear your truth. Listening is easy, holding is not, and your vulnerability deserves to be held, not weaponized, not dismissed, not minimized. This doesn't mean you close yourself off. It doesn't mean you become guarded or cynical. It means you become more attuned. You learn the difference between someone who is curious and someone who is safe. You learn how to trust your own pacing, your own instincts, your own rhythm of revealing. You learn that not everyone is a safe container, and that's okay. Their inability to hold space for your vulnerability doesn't mean you're too much. It means they weren't the right place for you to land. One of the most radical things you can do is protect your vulnerability while still staying soft. To know that you can be open and kind and real, without offering up every piece of yourself. To understand that transparency and intimacy are not the same thing. One is about being seen. The other is about being known deeply and safely, and the latter is worth waiting for. There is a quiet power in saying, this part of me is not for public consumption. There is strength in holding space for your own healing before you let others into it. There is wisdom in recognizing that your heart is not a proving ground. It's a sanctuary, and only those who move with reverence get to enter. Vulnerability is beautiful, but it's not owed. It's a gift, a sacred offering, and you get to choose who's worthy of receiving it. You get to choose who earns access to the parts of you that are still tender. You get to choose who gets a seat at your table and who does not. Because at the end of the day, protecting your vulnerability isn't about being hard. It's about being wise. It's about understanding that your openness is a privilege, not a public service. And the more you honor that, the more you'll attract people who don't just tolerate your truth. They cherish it. There is a moment that changes everything, not with a scream, not with a fight, not with a dramatic exit, but with a whisper, asterisk, I'm done. Asterisk, that's the moment people don't see coming. That's the moment that carries the most power, because when someone says, I'm done, what they're really saying is, asterisk, I've chosen me. Asterisk, this truth doesn't come out of nowhere. It's born out of years of emotional labor, quiet sacrifices, second chances, and sleepless nights trying to understand what went wrong. It's built on the foundation of trying, really trying to make it work, to be enough, to fix it, to stay kind in the face of cruelty. It's not the first time you've thought about leaving, but it's the first time you mean it, not out of anger, not out of revenge, out of clarity. I'm done is a reclamation. It's when the illusion breaks. It's when you stop hoping someone will change, apologize, see you, understand the harm, or finally show up the way you've begged for. It's not spite, it's survival. It's the moment you stop abandoning yourself for people who have made a pattern of abandoning you. This moment is dangerous to those who relied on your doubt. Yourself. Doubt was the opening they needed, because as long as you questioned your worth, you stayed. As long as you tried to be better. They didn't have to be accountable. But when you say, I'm done, what you're really doing is putting the power back where it belongs, inside you. People often misunderstand what done looks like. They think it's rage. They think it's slamming doors. But true detachment is quiet. It's calm. It doesn't try to convince or perform. It simply exits. It no longer seeks closure because it understands closure isn't something you get from someone else. It's something you decide for yourself. Choosing yourself after years of self-abandonment is a spiritual shift. You start to see the places where you were silenced, where your needs were minimized, where your empathy was exploited. And instead of trying to explain why that hurt, you simply stop engaging. You stop justifying, you stop proving, you stop bleeding emotionally for people who only show up to watch. Saying "I'm done" is not about punishment, it's about freedom. It's the point where you realize your peace is more important than being understood. It's the point where you trade chaos for clarity, confusion for consistency, exhaustion for ease. It's when you finally grasp that love is not supposed to hurt like this, that love is not supposed to cost you yourself. There's a reason people fear this shift in you, because the version of you that's done is the version they can no longer manipulate. They can no longer bait you with guilt. They can no longer draw you back in with half-hearted apologies or future promises they never intend to keep. Your silence becomes your boundary. Your absence becomes your power. Your refusal to engage becomes the loudest message you've ever sent. And while this transformation may look sudden to others, it's never sudden to you. You know how many nights it took. You know how much of yourself you gave. You know how many red flags you rationalized. You know how much you tolerated in the name of love, loyalty, or fear. So when you finally say "I'm done," it's not a loss of hope. It's the birth of self-respect. Choosing yourself might mean being alone for a while. It might mean walking away from people who once felt like home. It might mean sitting with grief, with regret, with all the questions that still don't have answers. But that pain, that's growing pain, that's not the pain of staying stuck. That's the pain of shedding old skin, and eventually you stop missing the drama, you stop needing the apology, you stop craving their attention. You realize you don't need to win a war of words to reclaim your worth. You realize you're allowed to walk away without permission, without closure, without offering another piece of your soul as evidence. "I'm done" is not a threat. It's a declaration. It's saying, "I love myself too much to stay in spaces that poison me." It's saying, "My healing matters more than your comfort." It's saying, "I will no longer shrink just to keep the peace." That's not selfish. It's sacred. And perhaps the most liberating part of all is this. When you choose yourself, you stop needing someone else to validate your value. You stop waiting to be chosen because you realize you were always the one you were waiting for. Your love, your trust, your protection, your belief. So when you hear those words "I'm done," don't mistake them for weakness or bitterness. They are the sound of a soul returning to itself. They are the quiet roar of boundaries being born. They are the anthem of someone who has remembered their worth. Because once you've chosen yourself, you can't go back to living as a second-class citizen in your own life. You can't go back to proving what should have been seen all along. And you won't, not because you're angry, but because you're free.